Hi everybody, Princess Rainy Cloud here, and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, welcome to you as well. My channel is all about the strange and unusual, and I tend to be a magnet for the strange and unusual, and not just in choices of boyfriends, but in life in general. Throughout my life, I've had so many bizarre things that have happened to me, and I decided that it was finally time to start sharing them with others and telling my story. I'm a storyteller. I love to entertain my friends, so I thought I would take a shot at entertaining you as well. So I hope you enjoy my videos. If you've been watching them so far, I hope you enjoy them as well. And I'm always interested in your feedback. So, leave me a message in the bottom, in the comments, and let me know what your thoughts are on my videos as we go and the various subjects that we cover. And also, if there's a subject that you're interested in that maybe I haven't covered yet, I would love to hear from you. And there's a very good possibility that is something that I'm thinking about. So, I'm really open to your suggestions. Well, I have to say this video has been a long time in the making. I apologize for the time frame between the last release and this video. I tried on two separate occasions. The first time I went through the whole thing, went back to play it back, and realized that I had not connected my microphone. So I plugged the microphone in, got everything set up, did a sound check. Everything seemed to be fine. And I went through the whole sequence. I went back to play it and there was still no sound. I don't know what was going on. If you're watching this, that means it worked. So I do apologize for the delay. Anyways, I want to welcome y'all back. And this video is actually a very interesting one, and it is the second episode in the mini series that I am basically calling Haunted Pine Castle. And if you saw my previous Pine Castle video, it is about a 1930s estate that was built in Laguna Beach, California. It was built as one big house with additional guest houses in back on a property consisting of approximately 8 acres. It's a luxury apartment complex. They kind of started going through the transition back in the 60s, and then it was then completed in the 80s. And since then, it's changed hands several times since it's been built. I worked for the owner that was prior to this current owner. So I had many years working and visiting Pine Castle, and during those years I have had some very bizarre experiences, to say the least. My last video, I spoke about 2 separate occasions where I encountered disembodied voices, and I get chills when I think about it, because the first time was the very first time I had gone there for a dinner party, and it happened to me in the bathroom. It scared the hell out of me, for lack of a better word. And then the second time was just bizarre. I was working there and had heard the voice of one of my tenants calling out to me, who I thought was out of town. So if you haven't seen that video, definitely go back and check it out. It gives a little bit more history into this property and just the little bit of the backstory on it. But today I want to talk about an event that happened to me, and I also had a witness. My daughter was with me at the time, and it was just so bizarre. And the only thing that I can call this is basically, it's the story about the doppelganger. A doppelganger. I had no idea what they were until one of my tenants had, informed me that that is what I saw. So today I want to get into that. So let's get going. Okay, so doppelgangers. One might ask, I know we've heard that term before, and we often use it when we're talking about, say, you meet somebody that looks just like someone you know, you go, oh, I saw your doppelganger today. So oftentimes we associate the word doppelganger with just somebody that looks like someone else that we know. But there's more to this term than meets the eye, and it's actually kind of strange. I did some research on it because I thought I don't know anything about what this actually is. I knew that there was a supernatural connotation to it, and something that I just didn't really understand. I wanted to find out just exactly what a doppelganger was, what was the origin, and I found it was way more interesting than I ever thought it was. It turns out that the actual meaning of the word is an apparition or a look-alike of a living person, basically a twin of that person. But it's not necessarily a physical twin. It's more referring to like a spirit twin. Now, the word doppelganger is actually a German word, and it literally means double goer. But when you look back into the whole history of the concept of that spiritual twin, that double, it goes back way back beyond just the German term. It goes back to ancient Egypt, Norse mythology. In fact, in Egypt, it was referred to as the Ka, as in K-A, Ka. And they believed that everyone had a double and that they both had the same feelings, the same thoughts. And that also plays into why the ancient Egyptians were so into mummifying their bodies after death, because they believed that as long as that body was preserved, it gave something for that spirit double to hang on to. And as long as that body was preserved, it ensured that they had eternal life in the spirit realm, which I thought that was very interesting, and that answered so many questions of why they were so obsessed with mummifying the dead. Then when you also look into, say, the Norse mythology, the Norse word for it is vardugur, and that meant someone that went ahead of you. So basically, the only way I can really put it into words is they summed it up as someone would see that person doing things. It was the spirit form of the person that would go ahead of them and do specific things, and then the actual person would follow doing the same things that the spirit form had already done. So you would often have people reporting that, hey, don't I know you? Haven't you already been there? You've already done that. What are you doing? And it's kind of interesting because it's almost like the opposite form of deja vu. And it makes one wonder if that plays into the whole deja vu. Is that why we experience the deja vu? Is because our spirit form went ahead of us and has already done that? That's a really interesting thing, because when you start thinking about quantum physics and parallel universes, who really knows? So it's just very interesting. And it was also brought out that it was only more modern time, this concept started taking hold in the English speaking world, that it started taking on a more nefarious tone, where it now is kind of looked at as not just a twin, but an evil twin, or a harbinger of bad luck and even death. So there's a lot to this whole concept of the doppelganger. It's really interesting, the various forms that this word takes on. Now, looking a little bit deeper into it, what does the actual science field say about this? And it turns out that there is a term for this, and it's called hotoscopy. And basically, it is a symptom or a side effect of someone who suffers from schizophrenia, and epilepsy, and sometimes even it can be indication that someone has a brain tumor. They are now seeing themselves. And if you really think about it, that would be an indication of something that isn't good, because it would indicate that there's something wrong going on with your brain, whether it is something like schizophrenia, epilepsy, or possibly even death eventually from a brain tumor. So maybe that is where that indication of it being a bad omen comes into play. I don't know, but it was a very, very interesting history of it and the way it all kind of plays out. And also, it's very interesting because seeing one's doppelganger is a bad omen. There are accounts in history where this has actually occurred, and probably one of the most famous accounts of someone seeing their doppelganger and then meeting with an untimely death would be Abraham Lincoln. It is said that on 3 different occasions, Abraham Lincoln saw his doppelganger beside himself in the mirror. He reported these 3 occurrences to his wife, Mary Todd, who was also very much into the spiritualist side of life, and she immediately viewed it as a bad omen, and she warned him that something bad was impending. And not long after that, he was assassinated. So did it play into that? I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Even seeing a portrait of someone else that looks like you is also a bad omen. In fact, that goes also back to the First Nations people. There are several Native American tribes that do not like photography. In fact, viewed photography as capturing their soul. And that many of them believed that photo then became their duplicate. So basically, they were avoiding having a doppelganger, and they believed that once that photo was taken, that gave an opening for that double. Now, also, one might ask, well, what if you do see a doppelganger of someone else? You don't necessarily have to see your own. When you see someone else's doppelganger, that could indicate that that person is very, very ill. And when I say seeing their doppelganger, I don't mean someone who looks just like them, like another person that resembles them. I'm saying a spiritual or an apparition version of that person. So that version of the doppelganger plays into my story that I want to share with you today. And now you're probably wondering, where am I going with this story, and how does it fit into the whole Pine Castle high strangeness that I experienced over the year? As I explained in my last video, when I first started visiting Pine Castle, I wasn't working there yet. I had a very good friend that lived there. His name was John. And then the owner of Pine Castle was a man named Richard Masson. Well, when I started working for him, he was in his early 80s. He had had an operation on his spine and was having trouble healing from it. He was in a lot of pain, and we would struggle to try to get him to do his therapy. He didn't travel as much anymore. He rarely left the house, but he was still fairly mobile, like in his own apartment. Would every once in a while come down and then go out like shopping, but he would always have an assistant with him that would help him down the stairs, because he lived up in the penthouse apartment. Now the entrance to the penthouse apartment was this really very steep, flight of stairs that came out the back of the building, and then it kind of came down and exited by where the barbecue area and the pool was. So if he came out his front door, he had a clear view of the pool area, the barbecue area, and then also the statuary garden. After that operation, he basically set his whole house up as if he lived in he lived in a hospital, and he liked to dress in his hospital gowns when he was at home. And then of course he had this little bracelet. I can't explain it, but he would wear this little brace around his neck because he was basically a hypochondriac. And I love him, and I don't mean to be saying anything bad about him, but anybody that knew him, they just knew this was part of it. He was just an interesting, very interesting character. He got around his apartment just fine, and we only had someone staying with him at night while the rest of us were either gone or the people who lived on the property that worked for him were asleep in the event that anything happened and he needed assistance. However, for the most part, he was pretty self-sufficient, except for going down those stairs and driving. He basically stopped driving because of his medical condition as well. Well, Richard was very particular, and in the pool he did not allow anyone to swim who was under the age of 18. He was just very, like I said, he was OCD, and he would worry about all those little things, so we just kind of let him, have it his way so he wouldn't obsess about it. My daughter was in high school. She was, I believe at the time, she was about a freshman in high school, freshman, sophomore. And she had been on the water polo team since she was in junior high. And she was an extremely strong swimmer. She not only played water polo, which is a very brutal sport for anyone who's ever watched it, not only do you have to be able to swim, you have to be able to be strong enough to fend off your opponents who are hanging on you while you're trying to make a shot or block their shots. So it is a very, very, very tough, brutal sport that requires a very strong swimmer in order to play this game. Now, also, when she wasn't playing water polo, she was on the swim team and would compete on the swim team. So the girl spent a large portion of her life either in the pool, in the weight room, or running the track. We lived in Laguna at the time. And where I lived, I was only a few blocks away from Pine Castle, but I didn't have a pool to swim in. So on certain days when it would get really warm or I just wanted to lay in the sun or just go relax, I would just pack a little bag and I would either go to the beach or sometimes I would go to Pine Castle and go just enjoy the pool. For the most part, she never came with me because she spent so much time in the chlorine water that the thought of getting in the pool on her off time was just something that wasn't interesting to her. Well, it was during her off time, like early August. She was out of school for the summer. They hadn't started their training program for the upcoming water polo season yet. Swim team season was over. So she was kind of in that in-between stage where there was really nothing going on with the two sports that she played. It had been a very warm week that week in Laguna. And she had mentioned to me, did I think it would be okay if she came to the pool with me that weekend? We just wanted to spend some time together. And I told her, I got to ask Richard because he doesn't allow anyone in the pool under 18. As I mentioned, he was very obsessive, compulsive about that kind of stuff. But I decided I was going to run it by him. Well, after we kind of went back and forth for a little while, he conceded and gave me permission to allow her to come to the pool. Late afternoon on a Sunday, and I had just talked to Richard that Friday. We had this full-on conversation about Allison being able to hold her own in the 5 foot of water of this pool. We hopped in the car, we drove over to the castle. The sun hadn't gone down yet, but it was just that late afternoon time. So we get in the pool and we're just having a great time and we're swimming around, and we had been in there for a little while, probably maybe about 30 minutes. So she got out of the pool and hopped into the jacuzzi, which was right next to the pool. So, I was on the side of the pool talking to her like this, and she's kind of like facing me from the jacuzzi, and we're talking and laughing and just having a good time. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, we hear a voice yelling at us saying, "What are you doing? Get out of the pool. You don't belong in the pool." And we're like, oh my God. And we looked up because it was coming from Richard's balcony, the entrance to his home at the top of those stairs. I could only see part of him because my view was kind of being blocked by one of the hedges that went around the pool area. But she had a straight shot at him, and she's looking at him, and she looks over at me. And she goes, "It's Richard. He came out. He's yelling at us." And I was like, "Well, I knew it was him because I heard his voice, but I thought, why is he yelling?" And I yelled up to him. I said, "Richard, it's Marcy. It's okay. It's just us. Don't worry about it." And I looked at her. I said, "Is he still out there?" And she's like, "Yeah, he's just standing there." And I said, "He's just standing there." So, and I'm just trying to look, and I could only see partial, like I could kind of just see the lower part of his body. But basically, she described him as he's wearing like a kind of a really very light, dusty, kind of almost like a blush pink hospital gown, and he had his little walker, he had his little his little neck brace on, and I mean, she described him to a T, and she had seen him once or twice, but she never saw him in the hospital gown. But it was like, it was definitely him. And I was like, "Is he still there?" And she's like, she kept looking, and she was like, we were just like I felt really bad because I thought, is he losing it? Did he forget that he just told me 2 days ago that Allison can come swimming? And I called out to him to let him know wwho I was so that he wouldn't be worried, because sometimes we would have neighborhood kids that would break in and to the property and go swimming, and he would come out and kick them out, right? So I was just like, and she's like, we're just looking at each other like, should we get out? I was like, "No, I'm not getting out," because he gave me permission and he's losing it, and we'll talk about it tomorrow, right? So she turns around, she looks, she goes, "Oh, he went back in." I was like, "Oh, is he gone?" She goes, "Yeah." I was like, "Don't worry about it." She goes, "Should I get out?" I was like, "No, don't worry about it." So we're swimming around, okay? We're just having a good time. And a few minutes later, we hear voices again. And I thought, oh no, here we go again. But they're coming down the stairs, and I kind of glanced, I realized that it was my friend John and this other guy named Ed that would work for Richard on the weekends, because as I mentioned, I had a girl that we had hired that would stay with him overnight. But we kind of got to the point where we hired another guy on who would stay with them during the weekend so that she could have the weekend off. And then while he was there, he would also do cleaning. So the two of them were coming down the stairs. And like I said, it was a Sunday evening. It was basically after dinner time. And they're coming down the stairs, and they start walking by the pool. And John looks over, he goes, "Oh, hey, girls. What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, we decided to come for a swim." And he goes, "Oh, it's like the perfect afternoon for it." And I'm like, "Yeah, the water's perfect." And I said, "Wow, Richard's in rare form tonight, huh?" And he's like, "What? What are you talking about?" And they're both looking at me like they had no clue of what I was saying. And I said, "Well, Richard," I said, "he's full of it tonight. He's full of piss and vinegar because he just came out and yelled at it." I said, "I cleared it with him on Friday afternoon that I was going to bring Allison over the weekend so that we could go swimming." He said, "No problem." I said, and then we'd only been here for a few minutes, and he came out and started yelling at us, telling us to get out of the pool. We didn't belong here. And I yelled up to him. I said, "Richard, it's Marcy. It's okay. It's just us." And he didn't say anything, but he just kind of stood there. And Allison said he was just kind of staring her down. And then he just turned around and decided to go back inside. I said, "So he's full of it tonight, huh? He's just like feeling feisty." And they looked at me like they were so stunned, because John's like, "I don't know what the hell you were talking about, because Richard's sleeping." And I was like, "What?" I said, "Well, he must wore himself out." He goes, "No, he's been sleeping all afternoon." He said, "I called him up earlier and he was really groggy. And so Jim, his partner, made a cake," because he used to have a bakery. So Jim made these really amazing cakes and pies. And so he made a carrot cake, which was Richard's favorite. And John thought, well, maybe I can get him up out of bed if I bring him up a piece of carrot cake, because he wanted him to be, we were always trying to encourage him to be active. When he was sleeping all day, John started getting a little worried about him. So he brought him up a piece of cake and thought, well, he could bribe him to get out of bed with sugar, because he was a total sugar fiend. But he was just like, "Oh no, just put it in the kitchen. I'll have some later. I just want to sleep. So John stayed up there for a while because he was already up there when Allison and I arrived at the pool. So Richard had been asleep the whole time. And we were stunned. We're like, we saw him. He came outside. He yelled at us. And Allison's going into, because Allison didn't see him very often. And John's like, are you sure it was Richard? It's like, who else is up there? I said, it's you, Ed, and Richard. I said, it was Richard. I heard his voice. I could see part of him, but I couldn't see the whole of him because of that hedge because there's this really tall hedge. I said, but Allison saw him directly. And she goes, yeah. And she's explaining to him and telling him that, he's wearing his collar. He had his little walker. He was wearing his little, really light, dusty pink hospital gown. And John's like, he doesn't have a dusty pink hospital gown. What are you talking about? He always wears blue. And we were just like going, what the hell? What the hell did we hear and see? And why was he yelling at us? And I got goosebumps again. I'm just like, I don't know. And so John's like, this place is a weird, I don't know what happened, but whoa, that's some weird stuff. And even Ed was just, because he was usually a very down to earth kind of matter of fact kind of guy. And he was just like, the man was speechless. He was just standing there going, and he kept telling me, because sometimes John was known as being a prankster. And so we kind of, we were teasing him, and he goes, no. And Ed's like, no, John was with me. We were in the kitchen. He goes, and we just checked on Richard. He goes, I swear, Marcy, he's sound asleep. And I was like, then what is going on? It was Monday, the very next day after this happened, and I was back at work and basically handled all the business with Richard over the phone because of the fact that he was up in his unit and then I was down in the office. I was just trying to feel it out to see what was going on with him. And I told him, I said, Allison and I came swimming last night, and I just wanted to let you know, thank you so much. We really had a great time, and, we enjoyed ourselves. And he's like, oh, that's good. And I was just waiting for him to say, yeah, I thought you were someone else. Or I kept waiting for him to say, oh, I forgot that you guys were coming, or whatever. I don't know. I kept putting it out there. I didn't come out and say, hey, why'd you come out and yell at us? I wasn't sure what we had experienced. So I was putting it out there, giving him the opportunity to say, yeah, I came out. But no, he was just like, oh, yeah. And I asked him how he was doing because John had told me that he had been sleepy. And he said, yeah, I was feeling really sleepy yesterday. He made me some cake, but so he basically told me the same story that John was telling me about how he was just, so sleepy, and that even though John brought him his favorite cake, he just was too tired to have some, and that he maybe had, had a little bit later on that evening. And I was just like, I realized at that point in time that what we saw was an apparition. And as I've mentioned earlier, I knew nothing about the whole doppelganger thing. I was very weirded out by it. I didn't know. I didn't put a term to it at that point in time. And it was only when I started talking to a very good friend of mine that used to live there. I had talked to her on the phone because I used to confide with her over a lot of things. Her name was Nanielle. And Nanielle was very in tune with a lot of the spiritual side of life. She knew a lot about things that I really didn't know anything about. And she explained to me that you saw Richard's doppelganger. And I said, doppelganger? And she said, yeah. She said it's basically a spirit double, and that's not a good thing. And I said, well, what does that mean? Is that like something bad for me? And she said, no, that could be an indication of something bad for him, but it may just be She goes, she goes, that's what they say. She said, but it's probably just a superstition. But she goes, I think that's really odd that you saw that. And I thought back to other stories that I had heard from the tenants who had seen, many different apparitions on the property, which we will get into some of those later, and experiences that I had just had in life in general. And I had seen people before that I knew were deceased, but I had never seen an apparition of someone that was still alive. And for me, that was very, very strange. But then I also thought back to the time when I had, had that disembodied voice that I heard up in the penthouse bathroom. And I just started kind of, just coming to the conclusion that there was just a lot of weird things going on, especially up in that unit. I mean, so many people had passed away up there or in the building in general. It was Richard, and I could see him. I mean, he was solid from what I could see. Like I said, I couldn't see the whole thing up at his face, but I could see his legs. I could see the walker. I could see the hospital gown. My daughter had the full-on view of him, but he was there plain as day. And it was just so odd, but it kind of stuck with me because about a month later, maybe a little bit even longer, John used to go up and do Richard's laundry for him. And always make sure he had a fresh hospital gown on every day. And, he had his whole room set up like a hospital room. It was very interesting. John was doing the laundry, and he had been folding his hospital gowns, and he was putting them back in the drawer where he always kept them. And John said as he was folding those hospital gowns, he recalled that incident and started thinking about it and decided to kind of look through his drawer a little bit more, like under, through everything that was in there, just to see if there was something in there that was similar to what we had seen. And he came running down to the office that after. I will never forget it. He came running down this afternoon, and he said, Marcy, you're not going to believe what I just found. I was folding his hospital gowns, putting them away. I looked through the drawer because I thought about what you and Allison had said that night. And I was just so curious, does he even have a pink hospital gown? He goes, and do you know, I found one. He had one. It was all the way at the bottom of the drawer, kind of off to the side under some other clothing, but it was there. And I just remember it was amazing. The blood just kind of rushed from my head, and you never get used to, I always say this, but it doesn't matter how many times these types of things have happened to me, I never get used to it. I'm always so shocked when it happens. And what's strange is getting back to the whole idea of the doppelganger and a person seeing someone else's doppelganger, and that it could indicate that they're very ill. Well, strangely enough, after that, he started declining. His health became worse and worse. And it wasn't about his back. It wasn't about the fact that he wouldn't do his rehab or, his physical therapy. It turns out that he had a very debilitating blood disease where his bone marrow was not producing enough red blood cells. And it was linked to anemia, but it wasn't just anemia. It was the production of the actual cells. And he always likened it to pre-leukemia, but basically his blood count, his red blood cell count would drop really, really low. And at first it was only a little bit, and it would take months for it to kind of really drop off. But then it started getting weaker and weaker, and the time between when his blood cells would drop off started getting shorter and shorter, because when he would get down to a really low blood cell count, that he would then have to go get a transfusion. And at first it was like one every so many months, and then it got to the point where it was almost every month. But it was very bizarre because that all started kind of going downhill shortly after we saw his doppelganger. So did it have something to do with it, or is it just a coincidence? Is it a psychic thing that Allison and I had that we're picking up on Richard and his fears of us being in the pool? I don't know. I don't know what it was, but it was very strange. And to this day, it still haunts me. I can still hear that voice. I can still see, his legs and his walker, and the look on Allison's face, and just that whole feeling that came with that experience was very overwhelming. So I wanted to share that with y'all because it was so weird. And I'm very curious if this has ever happened to any of you. Have you ever had that experience? Have you ever had somebody say, hey, I saw your doppelganger? Have you ever came across someone on social media that looks exactly like you? Like many of the celebrities have people that show up that look just like the one of Shakira. Blows my mind. This girl looks just like her. But has this ever happened to you? What are your thoughts on it? I'm very curious to know. But I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's some interesting, thought-provoking ideas that, I'm very interested in your comments. So I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to thank all my subscribers. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. And if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up so that it gets out there to more people and I can start sharing my videos more frequently with those on YouTube. So I want to thank you again. Love all y'all. Oh, thank you so much for watching and have a good one until I see you next time. Bye.